Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's joined us for this Trinity College London Transformative Teachers webinar, the last one of 2024. But don't worry, we've got more coming up in 2025. As always, the chat box has been very busy as people have been joining. And it's great to see colleagues and peers from around the world joining us. I've seen people from pretty much every continent, I think. I'm not sure if we've got anyone from the Oceania, Australasia kind of areas, but I've seen Taiwan and Sri Lanka and Dubai, Saudi Arabia, lots of countries in and around Europe, including Hungary, Romania, Germany, Italy, and we've got some people joining us from Latin America and North America as well. I've seen, I think, Argentina and Mexico, so really great to have so many people based here today and joining us. Before I hand over to today's speaker, as always, just a little bit of housewarming for everyone here. Housekeeping, not housewarming. Housekeeping. So we're going to be here for about 1 hour today. Our speaker is going to be speaking for about 45 to 50 minutes, and there'll be time for you to ask questions at the end. As you already know, as you've logged in, this is being recorded. So if you have to drop out for any reason, don't panic, it will be recorded and it will be up on the Trinity College London website, which I'll put the link for up in the chat box later. Speaking of the chat box, we're very keen for you to continue using it as you have been, to write lots of messages to each other and to our speaker. You'll see there are quite a few of us here today, so the text box or the chat box moves quite quickly. If you have a question that you'd like our speaker to answer, then it might be a better idea to use the Q&A, which you will see somewhere on your screens there. But please do keep this interaction coming. I'm going to hand over to our speaker now. Just a quick introduction. Lucas is a very experienced teacher educator who's currently based in Rome in Italy, where he's the Director of Studies at Accademia Britannica, that's International House of Rome. He's diploma qualified. He holds a master's degree in educational human resources already, and he's currently pursuing his second master's degree in professional development for language education. And he is here today to talk to us about the importance of being assessment literate. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Lucas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you for having me. And I can see already a very international group of people and colleagues here. So people from Taiwan, Dubai, Romania, Italy. So as you all know, I'm based in Rome, Italy. And hopefully today we're going to have a super awesome session together. So feel free to drop your message in the chat box, Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. So let me just share my screen and we can get started. Okay, perfect. Can you all see my screen? Yes, I hope so. So as you can see here, today I'll be taking us all on an assessment testing journey, okay? So hopefully by the end of the session, once we've covered some basic principles of assessment, we'll be able to answer this question over here. Okay, I'll give you my 2 cents, you'll give me your 2 cents, and together we'll understand why it's so important that we become assessment literate and that we know at least the basics when it comes to assessment/testing. So yes, I'll be covering the basics here. And why do I keep saying the basics? Because believe it or not, the more I read about, the more I go back to assessment literature, the more I understand there is just so much for us to know and to learn. There is just so much still that I don't know about because there are so many variables and everything. So it would be virtually impossible for me to cover everything here in a 45-minute session. Okay, so hopefully today I'll give you just some basic principles for you to get started, for you to get going, or to maybe revise some things that you already know. Okay, so without further ado, let's see what we have on the menu for today. I always like to set expectations before I start my sessions. So then, at the end of the session, you can, tick those boxes and do some sort of self-reflection and try to understand whether you understood some of the concepts that I aim to cover when I first started. So today, I hope that by the end of the session, you'll be better able to differentiate assessment from testing, because yes, there is a difference there, even though they do overlap, but we'll talk about the difference there as well. Then we will also going to be talking about how to conduct formative and summative assessments. A lot is talked about those two terms, but what do they mean really when it comes to, a real classroom application? So I'll give you guys some basic examples as well. And then last but not least, I hope that we'll be better able to be critical of the tests that we administer, that we carry out with our students, and understand what makes a good test, if there is such a thing. Okay. All right. So let's get started with the difference between assessment from testing. So I really like this definition by Baxter, Andy Baxter, in which he says the relationship between testing and assessment is similar to the relationship between the curriculum and syllabus. What does it mean by that? So in order for us to understand this concept better, let's set testing and assessment aside for a moment. Okay, just for a moment. We'll get back. We'll go back there. We'll bring our main topic back to the session. But for now, let's try to understand curriculum and syllabus. So basically, in a nutshell, syllabus answers the what question, right? In terms of content. So what is it that I'm going to be covering in my program in terms of content? Whereas curriculum, it has a much wider, it covers a much wider methodological range. And it goes into more, it has a more philosophical tone to it. What do I mean by that? So it answers the how and why questions. So how being, what are my methodological procedures? What methods am I going to be using? And the why would be my rationale. Why am I choosing this teaching framework or this method over the other one? So it's trying to understand the rationale behind my pedagogical decisions. So as you can see here, curriculum, it would answer the how and why questions, whereas with syllabus, okay, so curriculum encompasses syllabus, all right? However, it has a much wider range. So now, let's bring back our assessment and testing, because that's what we're here for, right? So in comparison, it is very similar here. So as you can see here, assessment, it encompasses a much wider range of criteria, okay, for evaluating a student's performance. And the funny thing about assessment is it does see testing as a useful tool, but it also considers other factors, okay, for us to analyze a student's performance. So in order for us to understand this better, now it's your turn, okay? It's your turn to take part in the session. So in the chat box, I have here 4 sentences, okay? 4 definitions, if you will. 2 of those relate to assessment and 2 of those relate to testing. So I'll give you guys 3 minutes to go over these 4 sentences / definitions and try to match them to either assessment or testing. Off you go, 3 minutes. Great. So I've got here Fabiana saying one assessment to testing, 3 assessment for testing. Great, great. Yeah, that's what I like to see. We're speaking the same language here, literally. So yeah, keep them coming before I show you the answers. Nice. Okay, great. Thank you so much for this. So yes, so as you can see here, assessment, it looks for elimination rather than enumeration. So back to the how, why questions there. It answers the how and why questions. It digs deeper, right? It tries to analyze and go beyond the surface, okay? And as examples of assessment, we have our infamous summative and formative examples, which we're going to be talking next. We're going to be talking about next, okay? Now, as for testing, in general, it's not a rule, it's not set in stone, but in general, it is mainly concerned with turning performance into numbers or at least meeting some pre-established criteria. So we would have there those boxes to tick whether to decide if it was either a pass or a fail and so on and so forth. Okay. And some examples of testing instruments would be a proficiency, diagnostic, and placement tests. Okay. So far, so good. Is it clear the difference? So now that we've cleared the difference between assessment and testing, we can then talk about formative and summative assessments, and most importantly, why and when we should use them, okay? First, let's define them, okay? So formative assessments, according to Brindley, they happen during the learning process, so that's very important. So it's while learning is still going on, with the main aim of using the results to improve instruction. Okay, so this is key here. It's while learning is still going on, it's cyclical, all right? So it has to have some impact on the teaching. It has to inform my teaching so that I can go back, redo it, reformulate it, retake it, read something in order for me to continue this cyclical movement that this cyclical nature that is attached to formative assessments. Whereas summative assessments, they measure the learner's and of course achievement and the overall effectiveness of the course. So unlike formative assessment, summative assessment is more static. It provides a static snapshot of a student's performance at a certain point in time. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the end of a course, for example. It could be at the end of a program or at the end of a cycle, for example. But it's got this static nature to it, okay? Now, let me test you, okay? Pun intended, yes, I'm going to test you. You have here a get feel exercise, and I want you to think of a preposition that would best fit in the gaps in order to define formative assessment and summative assessment. Okay, so I'll give you guys 2 to 3 minutes in the chat box. Just type in your prepositions, one for formative assessment and one for summative assessment. You guys are on fire here. That's amazing. Okay, for, about, for. Okay, great. For and of. Nice. Great. Assessment during learning. Oh, I like that. Okay. Perfect. Yes. So I think most of you guys are actually correct. So, oh, sorry. So formative assessment is assessment for/while learning, remember, where summative assessment is assessment of learning. It provides a static snapshot, okay, of the intended program or something that you're assessing your students on. Now, any examples would come to mind in a chat box? What's an example of a formative assessment, something that we do in our daily practices as teachers or educators? Any ideas of practical examples that we do in the classroom that would be considered a formative assessment? Questioning, okay. Exit tickets, yes, absolutely, absolutely. It depends though. We're going to talk about this now. It needs exit tickets could be an example of formative assessment if that informs your teaching, meaning if you use that and if you do exit tickets with your students but don't do anything about it, then it's not really formative assessment. But one thing that we do all the time that's part of our of what we do in the classroom, and it's almost like it comes with a package, really, it's homework. And most people don't understand and they don't realize that homework is formative assessment. When homework is in its main aim is to inform our teaching slash learning so that we can adjust, tweak, fine tune, and go back, revisit, redo, retake, reformulate, and so on and so forth. So homework is a really great example of formative assessment. Now, any examples of summative assessment? Exams, yes, exactly. Yeah. Our infamous like, and of course, exam, final exam, whatever you want to call it, test papers. Yes, yes, exactly. Amongst others. So now that I have an idea of what you guys, actually, you guys know a lot already. So I feel like I'm gonna be, repeating myself here, but it's always good to revise things. So let's play a little true or false game. Okay. So I'm gonna be popping up some questions on the screen. And I'd like you to decide whether the question is true or false. So you can just type in T for true and F for false. All right. So, are you ready? Number one, formative assessment means continuous mutual feedback. Is that true or false? Lots of T's there. Okay, great. Perfect. Yes. That is true. That is true. Yeah, remember, formative assessment involves going back to what has been taught and informs the teacher what has been worked on. So it has this cyclical nature to it, which I've already talked about. Yeah, so yes, it definitely involves mutual feedback. Mutual meaning, students should take part in that. It's not just a one-way street. It should be a two-way street. Yeah, so students should also take part in that. Okay. Now, number two, if you're not acting on the results you receive from tests, you're not assessing your students formatively. Is that true or false? Great. I'm getting some, conflicting answers, mixed answers here. Some people think it's true, some would say it's false. So if you're not acting on the results you receive from tests, you're not assessing your students formatively. This is actually true. Remember, for an assessment to be considered formative, you need to go back, redo it, retake it. You need to act on the results that you receive from either a task or a portfolio or a task-based performance task, whatever it is that you're doing with them. If you're not acting on those results, you are not assessing your students formatively. And this is why it's so important that we understand. I hope that with this session, we are going to be able to clarify this once and for all. And thank you all for being here because this is so important that remember, you need to act on the results that you receive. Otherwise, you're not assessing your students formatively. Okay, great. Number three, grades are only assigned to summative assessment. Lots of false there. Okay. I see someone saying true here. Okay. That is actually false. And this is quite confusing as well, because some people tend to think that if there's a grade to a paper, it is automatically as a summative assessment, for example. That's not necessarily true. I may still choose to assign a grade to, let's say, a test. Okay. However, again, going back to question number two, if I act on that result, if I go back to it, if I revisit it, reformulate it. If that informs my teaching and my students learning somehow while learning is still going on and something's done about it, then I am using those grades and assessing my students to assess my students formatively. Is that clear? By the same token, for example, I could still, let's say, let's imagine that I am doing a project-based task with my students. Okay, no grades assigned. I do nothing about that. I simply inform parents. Then I'm assessing my students summatively, even though I didn't really assign any grades. So do you see how in the system, the way we have it as, and nowadays, we tend to assign grades for the most part to summative assessments, but that's not always the case. And in fact, it should not always be the case. So grading doesn't necessarily have to do with summative assessment. Okay, you could still assign a grade to a formative assessment. Okay. Number 4, administering tests more frequently means doing formative assessment. True or false? That is false. Yes. Remember, formative has nothing to do with frequency. It's got to do with the impacts that it has on my teaching and whether I am doing something with the results or not. Okay. I could still do, let's say, task after task, do nothing about it, then I am not actually assessing my students formatively. So that is false. And last one. Simple classroom observation and informal quizzes, such as Kahoot, may be considered formative assessment. Is that true or false, you guys? That is true. Yes, perfect. Remember, students themselves may be, actually, in fact, they should be encouraged to carry out self-assessments in order to monitor their own progress and their own learning. So remember, number 1, it needs to be mutual as well. So formative assessment also means informing not only teaching, but also students learning so that they can also start becoming more autonomous and, you know, start changing some things along the way in order to perform better. So yes, that is definitely true. Great. So now that we've covered formative and summative assessment, what are the challenges with using them in the classroom? Okay, because yes, we do have some challenges when it comes to conducting formative assessment and summative assessment. So in the chat box, let's talk about formative assessment first. Okay, type in anything that comes to mind. What are some of the challenges that you may encounter if you choose to or if you are already using and conducting formative assessments in your teaching context? Levels, time management, absolutely. Nerves. Interesting. Because I would link that more to summative assessment as opposed to formative assessment, but you never know. Time consuming. If students don't understand why you're doing it if it's not a test. Oh, that is a great concept, Fabiana, which I'm going to talk about. So it has low face validity, which we are going to be talking about as well. Yes, different levels, preparing the questions. Great. So yes, these are the things that I usually face when trying to carry out formative assessment in my context. Okay. Again, I think we all agree it is time consuming. So regularly assessing our students, providing feedback, adjusting lessons can be time consuming, especially if you have large classes. So this is definitely a key challenge there. Another thing with implementing formative assessment in our context that it increases our workload as teachers. because designing, analyzing, keeping records of formative assessments, it requires effort. And we are already so busy. We have so much on our plates already then that we tend to fall back on the good old, summative way of doing things with our paper-based test instruments and everything like that. So I do understand this is definitely a challenge there. And in my opinion, this is a very serious one. Student engagement. I think Fabiana mentioned something which resonated with me. Yeah, students don't understand why you're doing it if it's not a test. Exactly. So the thing about student engagement is that because some students might not take it seriously and they might just see it as yet another practice activity. So they will not give formative assessments the importance that they deserve because they don't see it as a proper way of being assessed. There's a name for it. Yeah, we call it like it has low face validity or it's not face valid. We are going to be talking about that in the next slide. Okay. But yeah, so a problem with formative assessment is that it may not have face validity, meaning students slash or even stakeholders, people who are not really studying with us, but are responsible for those studying with us, they might not see those as a proper way of assessing our students. So that's also a problem. Now, what about summative? What are the challenges that we encounter? Yes, nerves. Okay. Anything else? Evaluation time. Great, Joe. Yes. Okay. We've got pretty much the same thing. So in my books here, the challenges that I usually encounter is, again, the pressure to perform. So high affective filter, anxiety, because there is, it's performance based, so they need to perform, there's grade attached to it for the most part. So yes, there is definitely a problem there. Limited feedback opportunity. Yes, because remember, students, they rarely receive detailed feedback after having been assessed summatively. And this is also a problem, right? Because of this static nature to it. And this one is the one that speaks to me. Design complexity. Okay. Because summative assessments, they tend to see tests as let's say a useful tool, and it's very popular out there. Remember, there are other tools out there, right? Summative assessment, it's got nothing to do with being a test only. We could use different instruments. However, tests are paper-based or computer-based tests, the way we see it nowadays, they are, by far one of the most popular ways of assessing our students summatively. And because creating and designing tests that are valid, reliable, practical, that are face valid, and so many variables, I could go on and on about it. It is extremely challenging. So that's why it's really difficult to create a summative assessment that's actually designed well, okay? And this actually serves as a segue to our next section of the session, which is testing now. Now, we're going to set formative and summative assessment to the side, and we are going to talk about the qualities of a good test. Okay. So, oops, sorry. In your opinion, and in the chat box there, would you typing for me, in your opinion, no right or wrong answer. Remember, it's a safe space here, you guys. What makes a good test good, in your opinion? Number of items, differentiates. Okay, great. So there should be some sort of differentiation there. Validity, great. So it needs to be valid, but what sort of validity? We've got different types. Yeah. Real life value like this, Simon. So meaning it needs to inform and impact our teaching positively. Because if it has real life value, what we do in the classroom it doesn't matter because we're not going to be teaching to the test, right? Whatever they do in the test, they're going to do well because it means that what we did in the class worked. Okay, accuracy rate, washback, perfect. So according to Baxter, we should ask ourselves the following questions to determine how good, if there is such a thing, a test is. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Does it have no negative impact on the teaching? And is it practical to administer, to carry it out? If you answer yes to all of these questions, congratulations, you are on the right track. You most likely have a really good test in your hands. Not a perfect one, because I think creating the perfect test is, in my opinion, is virtually impossible because there are so many variables. But you're on the right track. So whenever I have to be critical of the test that I administer in my context, or I have to even create tests myself, I'm a sucker for acronyms. So I'm sorry, I do like acronyms. If you don't, I apologize. But I usually think VRIP. It helps me go back to these nagging questions here. So is it valid? Is it reliable? Does it have no negative impact? And is it practical? So next time you need to be critical of the test that you administer. You need to create tests yourself. Think VRIP. I hope this proves to be useful in the future, because it certainly is for me. Now, what are those terms really? Let's go and delve into each of these terms. Let me see what time. How am I for time? Okay. I usually run out of time, you guys. I'm really sorry. Yeah. So let's talk about validity. When it comes to validity, you guys, we have three types of validity that we have to take into account. Okay. So three subproducts, if you will. There's content validity, construct validity, and phase validity. Remember, we just talked about phase validity a while ago. So 3 minutes in the chat box. You have here these three sentences. They are not in order, and I would like you to match these definitions with the right type of validity. Off you go. Okay, people are saying here B3, B1, C2. All right, let's see what we have. So those are the answers. And content validity, it basically, as the name says, it tests what it's supposed to test. So simply put, for example, if over the course of my program, I've taught my students simple past, but then in my test, I have questions testing them on present continuous, then there is a problem with content validity there. Okay. There are other things to be considered there, but I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible here. Construct validity, it has to do with how well designed your test is, and if it actually tests what it's supposed to, which is extremely difficult. In my humble opinion, I think it is, out of all the three types of validity, I think it is the most difficult one to achieve, because when like putting a test together, there are a lot of things that need to be taken into account in terms of sequencing, the order of complexity. Instructions need to be clear enough with an example attached for the most part. Pictures need to be, clear enough, but also should not have any association with things that are not part of the scope of the test. So there are so many variables to take into account when it comes to construct validity that, in my opinion, I think it's the most difficult one to achieve. And then again, the last one that we have here is our face validity that we already talked about. So a test is face valid if it feels and looks right to my student or stakeholder, if they accept the test as a proper test. Okay, so for example, going back again when we talked about formative assessment, it is usually a problem because students don't see that as a proper test. So if I use a test instrument and I want to use that and to assess my students formatively, it might be a problem because students, they feel like, it's not worth it. It's not worth my time because I'm not really like, I don't know, whatever it is. If they don't see it as a proper test, it's not gonna be face valid. Okay. So far, so good. Okay, great. Now let's practice. Okay, it's your turn now. I'm going to show you a video, all right, of a teacher correcting a test, an English test. Okay. While you watch the video, I'd like you to answer this question. What type of validity problem does this test have? Remember, we've got content validity, construct validity, and face validity. Okay, there could be more than one, right? But think about the major problem about this test. All right. Okay, I'm just sharing. Is it playing? No, it's not. Okay. All right, perfect. So I can see here most of you guys think that the main problem with this test is regarding construct, and you guys are correct. Because as you can see here, the pictures, they are highly associated with either, I don't know, brands or locations, right? So for example, the teacher used the Burj Khalifa instead of a generic building. So if the student writes Dubai, should that be considered a correct answer? So how could we have avoided that, in your opinion? Exactly. Federico is saying something interesting here. Cultural references may not be the same for every student. Exactly. Exactly. In fact, number 6 there, it might look like an avocado for some people and egg, for others. So it's really hard to say. So a good way to avoid that would have been maybe to make, first of all, to avoid pictures that are associated with brands or locations, use more generic images, for example. And also the instruction could have been a lot clearer. So I don't know, write the general name of the object in the picture, avoid names of brands, places, or specific models, right? So this is just an idea for you to see how complex construct validity is. Okay. Running out of time. Oh my God. Okay. Like really quickly, have a look at this test. Just a tip for you to make your test more construct valid. What about this task instruction here, in your opinion, makes this test, overall test, more construct valid? I'll tell you, it is also, this is just a tip for you. If in the future you want to start devising your own tests, so letting students know how many marks of the total score, the task is worth, also makes your test more construct valid, because you're going to allow them to, allocate the right amount of time and effort for each part according to the points. Okay, just so you know, fun fact here about making your tests more construct valid. All right, now let's tackle the remaining three. So we have reliability, the impact on my teaching, and practicality. And I have 4 definitions here. So that means 2 of those definitions will belong to one category. Okay. Now match the definitions with the right term. Great. Okay. You guys are acing it. Okay, 1, 4. All right. Winnie says 1 for Fabiana says 1 reliable, 2 no negative impact, 3 practical, 4 reliable. Nice, you guys. You guys are becoming assessment testing experts here. It's great to see. Nice. So yes, so basically those are your answers. So reliability, we've got 2 subtypes here. You have test reliability and score reliability. There is an overlap there, okay? They all affect each other in one way or another. So just as an example, if we use the video that we just saw, right? So if as an assessor, if I'm marking someone's test and I have that in front of me, that test in front of me, and then I see a student who wrote Dubai when there's clearly Burj Khalifa in front of me, as opposed to writing, I don't know, building. And then I start asking myself the question, should Dubai be marked as wrong or as a correct answer? This lack of clarity in scoring will introduce inconsistency and ambiguity in the test, which will directly affect its reliability. Do you see how they all communicate with each other in one way or another? Again, when we say wash backwash, it has to do with the impact that it has on the teaching. So am I teaching to the test or to the students? Okay, so backwash really is, and it doesn't matter, you can say backwash or wash back, okay? They all mean the same. It is the way that my test is going to influence my teaching and my students' learning, okay? It's like a mirror, really. Whatever the test prioritizes is what my teaching learning will tend to focus on. That's why when Simon earlier on mentioned about a test being a good test when it has a real life application or world usage, if the test does that, it's great because that's going to have a positive backwash in my teaching. However, if a test is focuses mainly on, I don't know, discrete points, grammatical, vocab points and stuff, this is most likely going to affect my, it's going to have a negative backwash in my teaching because it's going to have a negative impact on my teaching, okay? So that's what I mean when we say backwash and washback, it's the impact that it has on your teaching. Okay, and then practicality, it's how easy it is to administer, okay? So an example here would be, for example, if I were to get my students to perform a test-based assessment in the UK, meaning get them to go to a grocery store or to a coffee shop and order some food, this could be, let's say, a lot easier than actually doing that in my context in Italy. So that means doing a test-based assessment in Italy that has a direct link to real world use or real world application would be a lot harder to achieve and a lot less practical. Okay, so when we talk about practicality, really, it is about how easy it is to administer. That's why tests are still very popular because they are super practical. They are easy to administer and mark. So far, so good. Let me have a look at the chat box to see if you guys have any questions. Okay, great. We are almost done, you guys. Just a quick tip here. How can we make our tests more reliable? One idea is to include fresh starts. So fresh starts is really, it's when learners, they are giving more opportunities to perform well on a certain task. Okay, so if learners don't do well on a specific question type, they should be able to be tested again on a fresh task. An example of that is the Trinity exam, the ISC4, which relates to the C2 CFR level, if I'm not mistaken, in which students, they have 3 sections, okay? And so meaning they will have to submit 3 final writings. This is a writing paper, by the way, okay? A writing task. And they have to submit 3 final writings. However, for each section, students will have 5 options, 5 chances to try and to pick and to exercise their writing skills. And then they'll then be able to pick the best one from each section to submit. Okay, so this is a great example of including a fresh start in your exams or in your assessment procedures, okay? And in fact, yeah, Simon's saying that you can find out more about Trinity College London's ISC exams in the link below. All right, so now that we are reaching the end of our session, let's go back to the main topic. I mean, the main question that I posed at the very start. Why is it important that we become, or that we be assessment literate? Would you mind typing in the chat box a little bit? In your opinion, why do you think it's important that as teachers and educators, we are a little bit more assessment literate? To be fair, to be better teachers. Okay, great. Yeah, definitely. To teach more effectively, to assess our teaching, to assess our students appropriately. Yes. I see a lot of fairness there. Yeah, to be fair. I think it's got to do with also with creating tests who are more fair and contextually fair, because contexts are not the same. However, we still tend to use, or exam providers, they still tend to use the same test regardless of students' context, right? So this is great to reflect on our teachers, to see what works and what doesn't work. Yes, these are all amazing answers. I'm gonna give you guys my 2 cents, okay? Why do I think that we should be a little bit more assessment literate? I think we need to be more assessment literate to provide well-informed feedback on testing instruments that were not designed by you. So if you're conducting someone else's test, you'll be better informed and better equipped to actually give feedback on those testing instruments and actually advocate for change. Okay, which is actually my second point. So you'll be better equipped both in theory and practice to advocate for changes in assessments and testing instruments that lack validity, reliability, practicality, all of those terms that we just discussed, and that are more contextually appropriate and fair. Okay, does that make sense, you guys? I hope you guys are with me here. I believe we are on the same page. So that you can teach your lessons with a more critical eye, while aiming to avoid negative backwash, right? Remember, we should not be teaching to the test. We should be teaching to our students, yeah, regardless of the test that they'll have to face in the end. And remember, this is my final note here. The more professional our discourse is, the harder it'll be for people outside the ELT field or outside of the educational field to dictate our actions, okay? This will allow us to better discuss results and testing instruments with stakeholders, meaning parents, companies, etc. So what I mean by this is, I'm not saying that we should start using all of these terms with people who are not necessarily in the field. However, if you start sounding a little bit more professional and convey that professionalism by using the right terminology, I can guarantee you that people will start dictating less what we should or should not be doing, because I do feel like that for the most part, teaching is still one of the areas where we have a lot of noise. people who are not really experts telling us what we should or should not be doing. Um, um, this is just my humble opinion. All right, so and finally, let's quickly go over our takeaway points of this session. Formative assessment is cyclical and it always involves some redoing, retaking, reformulating. Okay, so I think our challenge really is to find flexibility in our teaching to make room for it. Summative assessments provide us with the overall results of a course program. Remember, a static snapshot. It is very difficult for a test to be 100% good as there are so many variables. And the variables are, remember, think VREP, validity, reliability, backwash, washback, and practicality. And be ready to use the right terminology so that you're better able to convince and advocate for future changes in your teaching context. Thank you so much. These are the references that I used for this session. Thank you for having me. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for sharing all that. It's quite a complex and challenging area, I think, but you've broken it down for us really well. And as you said, there's lots more to talk about here, but I think that's a really nice revision for some of us and a reminder of things that we should keep in mind whenever we're teaching, not just assessing or testing our learners. And I really liked the idea of what you were saying there about the mutual ness, if that's a word, the role that it plays. It informs the learners maybe where they are doing very well, for example, in certain areas and areas where they might need more support. And it informs us as teachers as of where those areas are so that we can adjust what we're doing in the classroom. We're not wasting people's time, basically. If our students all know how to do something, we don't need to waste time on it. And if we know that the
Absolutely.
majority of students are having issues with maybe it's a grammar point, maybe it's a particular writing genre or fluency or listening, then we know we can work on those skills. So I think that's a really nice way of putting assessment into teaching rather than just teaching that turns into assessment in this idea. And lots of people have been writing the same thing in the chat box here.
Yeah,
Couple
no,
of,
I agree with you.
a couple of questions that have come in, quite specific. So hold your hat. Here we go. Someone was asking here about writing and assessment, assessing writing in particular. Um, what sort of length of writing are we talking about? Is it possible to assess people on very short pieces of writing, or do they always need to be writing longer emails and essays, etc.? What is your take on that?
I think there's no right or wrong answer to this, really. For example, in my context, I've implemented this year actually, and it's so far so good. Uh, a process-oriented writing, so it's got this cyclical nature to it. So it's formative by essence because the fact that they have to revisit it, they have to come up with multiple drafts and do some sort of peer checking. So uh, it doesn't necessarily, it has nothing to do with the length of the writing per se, but it's more to do with, are we revisiting? Are we going back? Again, it's the reformulating, redoing, retaking. So this is process oriented. However, if you want to employ or a more product oriented approach to writing, then you could still do it formatively. Again, I don't think length's got to do with, I don't know if I got the question right, but length has got nothing to do with it being formative or summative. It's more on how you do it,
Right.
how you are going to be assessing it. If you are using the results, be it a short paragraph or a 4,000 word dissertation, if you are using that to impact, and if that impacts your teaching, if you are using those results and revisiting it with your students so that it informs their learning as well, then that's formative assessment. You were assessing them formatively.
And I suppose, as you were saying earlier as well, the kind of real life application to these things, we're not always writing very long things. We write short messages to friends, we write notes. Sometimes an
WhatsApp
email is
messages.
one or two sentences.
Yeah.
So students need to be able to do that, and we need to be able to sort of assess them as well on their ability to do that and to help them get better at doing those kind of things. Um,
Yeah.
Another sort of tougher question, I promise this is the last one. A couple of people were mentioning special educational needs or SEN, and in terms of assessment. So you talked there about designing or for us to go away and think about how we might design some formative assessment devices. To what extent does SEN, special educational needs,
Mhm.
need to play when we're creating these materials?
Well, when dealing with SEN students or SEN students, I think it's very important. It's really not, it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. So whenever we do that in my context, we bring experts in the house. But what I do know is that we need to apply different strategies there, depending on the sort of special education needs that we're talking about here. So be it the color of the paper, the size of the font, if you're talking about like something that, it has been printed out. So what I do, and also the frequency and the time that you're giving your students, your SEN students, so all of that will play a role in how well they will be assessed, be it formatively or summatively, or a test, if we're talking about a test here. There are many things. I think I think we're going to be opening up a can of worms here if we start talking about that here. I think it's not the main topic here. But the one thing that we try to implement in my school, we do change the size of the fonts and the paper as well, the
Mhm.
color of the paper. We don't use a white paper.
And I suppose with that, when you're talking about formative assessment as well as that sort of ongoing stuff that you're talking about, then, as we know our students and their abilities, whether it's in their first language or in other language, then we can sort of assess them on where they are and what their abilities are as well, right? So we know
Mhm.
if something's going to be particularly challenging, then we can adapt the way we're assessing, or we assess them on what we know they should be able to do, just as we did with and we do with the different levels of learners, I suppose,
And
right?
I think that's the nature, assessing our students formatively. Even if they're not SEN students or SEN students, that's the whole point of assessing our students formatively. It's so that it informs us as teachers what needs to be reformulated or I don't know, tweaked or fine-tuned so that we can go back and that changes. It's not set in stone, it's not a one size fits all approach. So I think the beauty of formative assessments is that it's because it's part of the learning process, right? It's attached, it's embedded into it. And I feel like for many reasons, we have done away with it. We're not really assessing our students formatively as we should.
Yeah, I suppose that's quite often. So in or perhaps sometimes assessments that could be formative are seen as kind of summative. So you might have in the school I work in, for example, in London, we have an end of week test because our students are studying with us every day. But that end of week test is not supposed to be. It can be graded, as you mentioned there, so people get an idea of things, but it's not supposed to be a pass fail. It's more
Yeah, but the way it's
informed.
conducted, it ends up being summative, right?
Right.
I know.
And I suppose it's about, as you said, vocalizing or telling the students that the reason we're doing this test or the reason we're doing this thing is not because I want to grade you know who's the best and who's the worst. It's because I want to know what you've understood so that next week I know what to work on or what to rework on. So that's that kind of idea that you were mentioning earlier. And again, that as to answer a couple of questions that are coming through, that means that a formative test and a summative test, there's not one that's better than the other. They just do different
No.
jobs, right?
Exactly. They serve different purposes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and just to touch on this a little bit, just in my context, it's exactly the same. We have a midterm. It used to be called up until last year a midterm task, and I changed it to midterm progress check to see if things change. So that because again, it tends and still it's hard, because not only students but also teachers, they tend to be like, oh my God, the results, like he got like 40%. I'm like, it's fine. So how is that informing you? So use that to inform your teaching. What can you do to make sure that you reformulate that, go back, revisit it, and how is that going to change your techniques from now on or your teaching practice from now on? So yes, for some reason we tend to weaponize formative assessments.
And I suppose that's the nature of teaching, right? It's not this
Mhm.
linear thing. It's kind of cyclical. You go back, you revise things, you think you've got something, a few weeks later you've forgotten it and you have to revise it to go forward. And that's part of the journey. And I really liked what you said as well, for those of us that work with young learners or teenagers, for example, that not only do we need to inform the students about the purpose of these tests, but we do need to think about the parents as well, so that they understand they're taking this test. I love the idea of calling it a progress check, or, kind of checking in
Yeah.
assessment rather than the test. That's really nice. I really think that's something I'll take back to my school, I think. We're going to wrap up there because that is the hour now. So I need to thank you, Lucas, for your really interesting and interactive webinar, the last one of 2024. So thank you
Thank
very
you
much
so
for
much.
taking time out. And thanks to everyone who has joined us from, again, all over the world. It really has been a truly international webinar. And I'm going to just end, because this is our last webinar of 2024, by saying that I've really enjoyed hosting these webinars this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing lots of you. I see lots of names coming up each month, so I'm looking forward to seeing lots of you again in 2025. We have a great lineup. Please keep checking back with the Trinity College London Transformative Teachers webinar website. That's a tongue twister, to see who is coming up and sign up there. And thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days, mornings, evenings. And I know for some of you, it's well gone midnight. So go to bed and get ready for classes in the morning. Thank you very much again, and see you in
Bye.
2025.
Thank you. Bye-bye.